creating a good skeleton watch really is a work of art. If done well, you can wind up with a beautifully exposed movement that really highlights the intricacies of a mechanical watch movement. Unfortunately, it can also cost a lot of money. And while there are a lot of really affordable skeleton watches, there's not a lot of really good affordable skeleton watches. There's some, and in fact we just looked at one from Sega Design not too long ago, and today I want to take a look at another one, and this is one that's at an even lower price point than that one, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Boderry Windmill. Probably noticed the paid promotions tag at the beginning of this video. That's because this watch was provided to me for free. I do get to keep it after the review is done. However, other than the watch itself, I did not receive any compensation for this review, nor did the brand have any input into the content of the review. Hey guys, this is Dave. Welcome back to Just the Watch, and we're looking at another skeleton watch today. And this is one that I was kind of excited to look at because it actually is a follow-up to what was the most popular watch that I reviewed on the channel last year. So the review that actually got the most views last year was of the Boderry Urban. It was a sub $200 skeletonized watch with a titanium case and a really great skeletonization with a really interesting movement inside of it. Now this follow-up addresses what were, I think, a lot of the design complaints that I had with the previous version. It uses a very slightly different skeletonized movement, but one that is just as technically stellar as the previous one. However, they did increase the price and drop the titanium case, so there's definitely some trade-offs here, and we'll be talking about what those trade-offs are. However, if you are looking for a skeletonized watch, if that's a style that interests you, this is one that you can pick up for under $200. In fact, they gave me a 15% off discount that if you use that, you can get it for, I think, $165. And this is to get a skeletonized watch that has a movement inside of it that has a 72-hour power reserve and is also a 28,800 beats per hour high beat movement as well. And it's very rare that you see those two combination of features coming together in a watch movement that's inside a watch that costs typically under like $1,000. You normally have to either choose between the higher beat rate or the extended power reserve. Now, in order to accomplish that, this watch is using a Chinese-based movement from Hangzhou, which is a movement manufacturer that I wasn't that familiar with when I reviewed the Urban, but I've gotten a little bit more familiarity with some of their movements as time has gone by. I was able to review the Solas Starlight, which uses a micro rotor movement from Hangzhou. And then now getting this one in is a slightly different one. This is a small seconds version, kind of the same one, with a different skeletonization than the Hangzhou movement that was in the previous Boderry watch. And so far I've been largely impressed with them. So before we jump into the actual review of the watch, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about this Hangzhou movement because people had a lot of questions about the movement in the previous one, and that's a big concern. The movement is obviously the heart of the watch, and in this low price skeletonized watch movement category, you're basically limited to getting skeletonized movements from China. Hangzhou seems to be putting out movements that seem to be fairly competitive with both Japanese and Swiss movements. The major question is always longevity, because I've only been able to test, the one that I have for about 6 months. It seems to be working great now, but that's not to say that it's not going to run into problems down the road. But I can tell you how that one has been running over the last 6 months and how this one that I've got in today has been running. So this new windmill from Boderry is utilizing the Hangzhou 7570 movement. But let's talk a little bit about the performance of the movement itself. And this is an area that I'm not an expert in, but one of the comments that came up over and over again on the previous review is that people mentioned that one of the challenges with an extended power reserve on a movement is that it tends to lose accuracy as the power reserve winds down. So it might be accurate when the movement is fully wound, but if you leave it alone for a day, or in this case up to 3 days, because that's basically it's a 3-day power reserve on here, by the time you get to the 3rd day it might start running really inaccurate, and it kind of defeats the purpose of having that extended power reserve. However, testing the previous one more extensively over the last 6 months and testing this one pretty extensively since I've gotten it in, both of them are running very consistent over the entire 72 hours stated power reserve. They're not running awesome, but they are running consistent, which is kind of the key thing. The previous one is actually running better. That one is running about 17 seconds fast, fairly consistently throughout the length of the power reserve. This new one that I have in is running not quite as well. It's running at about 24 seconds fast per day, but it is consistent throughout the 72 hours stated power reserve. Now, 24 seconds a day fast is not great, but it's not terrible either. In fact, if you take a look at the Seiko NH35, which is one of the most widely used watch movements in the micro brand world, that one has a stated accuracy of negative 20 seconds a day to plus 40 seconds a day. So at the very least, this Hangzhou is running within those specifications, within the tolerances of a Seiko NH35, again, over a 72-hour power reserve period. Now, might be getting a little bit nerdy here, but basically what a 72-hour power reserve means is that if the watch is fully wound, you can take it off your wrist and leave it alone for 3 days, come back 3 days later, put it back on your wrist, and it will still be keeping correct time. Now, I noticed something else interesting about this movement as I was testing it, and that's that the movement, well, it's stated to have a 72-hour power reserve. It actually lasted 84 hours until the time it stopped. But here's where the trick came in. It seems like after the 72 hours, that's when it started to run erratically, and I started to get really wildly varying times, and so that by the time it was just, barely chugging along, it was losing something like 90 seconds a day. So what seems like is happening is you're getting a consistent accuracy throughout the 72-hour stated power reserve, but the watch actually has more juice in it for another 10 hours. It's just not going to be able to maintain the accuracy after 72 hours. So I thought that was kind of an interesting observation. Anyways, with all that said, let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at the watch, and I'll wrap it up and tell you what my thoughts are on it. Okay, so here is the Boderry Windmill. What you have is something that resembles a sports watch with a very impressive skeletonized movement inside of it. Dimensions are very classic and well proportioned. You're getting 40 millimeters across, 48 millimeters lug to lug, 20 millimeter lug openings, and 11.5 millimeters thick. So nice and slim, it wears really well, especially with this integrated rubber strap that they've included. I feel like that just really matches the design really well. This comes in with 50 meters of water resistance, so it is going to give you some safety with water. So it's not going to be great for swimming or things like that, but you shouldn't have to worry about it getting wet accidentally. You're also getting a sapphire crystal to help with scratch resistance. And overall, the build quality feels pretty solid. Now on this version, you're getting a PVD coated black case. Case, to me, I feel like they've taken some inspiration from Rolex. It's something of a polished side with sort of satinized or brushed lugs on top with a crown guard. You're also getting a black coated crown with the Boderry logo. You do also get a see-through case back, which allows you to see both sides of that really cool movement inside of it. The overall design of the watch, I think, is very understated, which really allows the skeletonized dial to kind of jump out at you and take a lot of the visual interest, which is, I think, what you want in this case. The movement inside this watch is one of the best skeletonized movements I've seen, particularly at this price range. In my opinion, probably the best you're going to find under $200. You're getting a very technically feature-rich movement that has an incredible 72 hours of power reserve with that higher beat rate, 28,800 beats per second, which again is something that is kind of unheard of in movements in this price range. The fact that they've then taken that movement that's technically impressive and then skeletonized it to expose the inner workings of it all adds up to a really attractive package for a skeletonized watch if that's what you're looking for. So this one has a somewhat aggressive industrial look, but it's not overdone. I mean, as far as skeleton watches go, and in one respect, pretty much all skeleton watches are overdone in a sense. They're going to be attention-grabbing pieces, but this one I think is somewhat tasteful in everything that they've put together. Also, for a skeletonized watch, legibility is not bad. Those oversized arrowheads are pretty easy to pick out. It makes reading the time not too difficult. Now, that's again qualified for a skeletonized watch. This is, if you compare it to pretty much any normal dialed watch, the legibility is fairly poor. But skeletonized watches are notoriously difficult to read because of everything that's going on. Now, the second hand on this one is cool. It's cool that they've gone with this three-sided second hand that resembles a windmill with the red tip, enabling you to use it pretty easily. However, having that smooth 28,800 beats per second sweep, it's not as noticeable on a small second hand. Usually that's something you see better on a large second hand, a full-size second hand. So one of the main benefits of that higher beat rate is the aesthetic beauty of a smoother sweeping second hand. But you lose a little bit of that when the second hand has been shrunk to this size. That said, a small second hand is still a cool complication, and I think the way they've implemented it matches the character of the watch overall. You get a little bit of symmetry there where this kind of, you've got this sort of three-sided windmill shape on the second hand, and then again over the barrel with the skeletonization there. And overall, I think the skeletonization is just really beautiful and really impressive for an off-the-shelf movement like this. You can really explore the different inner workings of the watch. You can see the barrel and the mainspring, and when you wind the watch, you can watch the mainspring tightening, which kind of allows it to function as a power reserve. Because after a couple of days, you'll start to see the spring loosen up, and you can tell that it is getting wound down. And then when you're tightening it, you can see the spring actually tighten back up again, which is cool. You can see the balance wheel ticking away that's been highlighted by the text automatic and 72-hour power reserve. And if you look closely even in here, you can see some of the gears spinning along with the second hand to power it. So particularly if you're interested in how a movement works and wanting to see it for yourself and also display it to others, I think at this $200 or sub $200 price range, because this one's actually significantly under $200, especially with the discount that you can get, I think this is a really good watch for the price. Again, if your main thing is that you want a nice skeletonized watch. Now, one thing you might notice is that there's not a lot of anti-reflective coating, if any, on that sapphire crystal. So you do get a fair amount of reflections. However, I found that it's usually not that noticeable because the dial's so busy anyways. You know, a couple of extra reflections tend to get lost in all the busyness in real-life usage. But when shooting and filming like this, I think it's a little bit more noticeable. On the wrist, it just gives you a really cool kind of science fiction, I don't know, almost like Transformers kind of look to it when you see all the different gears and pieces of the watch in there. There's been a number of changes made to the new windmill version of this Boderry watch compared to the Urban, which I reviewed last summer. First off, this is a slightly different movement, so in this case, you're now getting a small second hand that does kind of resemble a windmill, which I think is where they got their name. Whereas in the older version, you had a regular second hand. Also, the skeletonization is different between the two. On the Urban, on the previous version, it had this kind of S pattern going throughout the top of the dial, underneath which you could see the movement. Whereas this one, it's less geometric and more asymmetrical. I feel like it has a little bit more of an aggressive industrial look now with this particular movement. The bezel has also been changed. You no longer have the numerals marking around the bezel. It's just a clean bezel with those kind of little triangle marks around it. The Boderry logo has been moved from the 3 o'clock on the old version up to the 12 o'clock on this one. And the handset is much more legible. You can see on the Urban it's almost impossible to pick out where those hands are, but thanks to the new larger arrowheads on the windmill, it's much easier to read the time. However, the previous version was a titanium case, whereas this new one is a stainless steel case, so a little bit of a downgrade there. And then obviously you can see that the strap is different. They've gone from a kind of distressed leather strap over to this integrated fitted rubber strap. If I was going to boil this down really quickly, I would say I prefer the design of the new version better. I like the changes that they made. I think that that's largely improvements. However, I'm a little bit disappointed that they didn't carry over the titanium case. Would have been nice to see that implemented in the new version. The watch does feature a small amount of lume on the markers and on the hands. However, it is not particularly bright and it doesn't last a really long time either, so I'm not going to be doing a full lume breakdown. You know, this is going to give you a little bit of after dark performance. It kind of looks kind of cool, but mostly, you know, it'll help if you walk from a bright room out into darkness for the first, maybe 5-10 minutes, and then after that, I wouldn't expect to get a lot of legibility after dark. But it's a nice thought that they included at least a little bit of lume on there. So is the Boderry Windmill worth your money to pick up? I think for a lot of people it will be, particularly people who are interested in a skeletonized watch and people who are interested in a technically superior movement, and they're willing to kind of take a little bit of a chance on this somewhat unproven Hangzhou Chinese movement in order to get these kind of really cool features like having that extended power reserve and that smoother sweep of the second hand. Additionally, the style is something that I think will appeal to a lot of people, especially the skeletonization on the dial, which really I think is kind of one of the most important things in a watch like this, because that's what a lot of people are really after when they're looking for this kind of a watch. Other than the movement inside, the watch itself is fairly straightforward and simple. The design could use a little bit of continued work, I think, but seeing how they have kind of begun to evolve that design a little bit since their previous version and make some improvements, that's an encouraging sign. And I think what they have now is still an attractive case and package that they're putting that movement inside of. It's definitely not the strongest part of the watch, but at this price, with those specs and the components and the movement and the skeletonization, I think you're still getting something that's going to be very appealing to a lot of people. Previously, I looked at the watch from Sega Design, and I think that that is a superior design and superior skeletonization. However, you are paying a lot more money for that one, and it is a very kind of radical style. In a lot of ways, this one's a more subdued, skeletonized watch that might be easier to wear for a lot of people. So if you've only got around $200 and you're interested in a skeletonized watch, I think this is a really great one to take a look at. Also, if you are interested, be sure you use the discount code down below to get that 15% off. And Boderry also mentioned that they would throw in that kind of gingerbread colored leather strap as well if you use that code. So let me know what you guys think of the watch, but that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for today. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.